hear you great.
Okay.
So I'd just like to introduce Priyesh. Priyesh, we're just going to add your blog. I'm just going to add your blog information and contact information to the chat window so people can know how to follow you. So
Sure.
please feel
Yeah.
free, Priyesh, to introduce yourself to the community who don't know who you are already, please.
Sure, absolutely. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone present here, depending on what your location is. My name is Priyesh Wagh, and I'm a Dynamics 365 technical consultant. So this is the slide I have. I work with a company called as CloudFronts Technologies in Mumbai, in India, and you can you can visit us on cloudfronts.com. So I basically work on project service automation, core Dynamics 365 sales implementations. I've been with CloudFront since the last 6.5 years now, and have taken care of projects around the world, mostly in the US, a few in Europe and India as well. And that is the QR code to my LinkedIn profile. And my blog is d365demystified.com. So the aim of my blog is to put our day-to-day developer problems in more simplified manner and the most obvious things people go out to search. Um, so I try to keep my posts 1 to 2 a week, depending how I get time. But yeah, I always look forward that I can help and reach out to the community and be an active member as and when I can. You can also follow me on Twitter at Priyesh_WNGman7, short for Wingman7. And yeah, my posts go out there as well. And I would like to thank Raz and the 365 community for having me to invite it to all these sessions. And it's a great part to be a part of this wonderful community. So, all right. Just a quick question, Raz. Is my session now or is it later on? Because I thought it was
Yes,
11 GMT.
it's right. It's now. Yeah,
Oh,
it's
okay,
yeah,
great.
yeah.
Superb. All right. So the topic I'm presenting today is project service automation. Um, 1 second. Yeah, so it's project service automation in PSA. The current version we are in is 3.x, 3.10 to be precise, point X. And so I'm gonna walk you through the agenda today. So first is the sales cycle. We will be looking at how first you need to go through the sales cycle to be able to first establish your first project. And then we'll be looking at project management and the resource scheduling. Then we'll look at time and expense entries, which is a relatively shorter portion of this presentation. Then we'll also put some light on the invoicing and reporting. So reporting is what we do at CloudFronts. So just a generic idea of what you can do. So you can put your all imagination to use and put your best case scenarios in place, and you can drive your own reporting as well. I'll also spend a few minutes talking about what is next in PSA. So I'm not sure if all of the audience follow what the upcoming product is, but which is project operations. So I'm going to be spending a few minutes talking about that as well. So to set expectations, this session is of methodology grade demo, meaning I have screen captures from the presentation the operations that I walked through, so that most of the things are quickly covered and you get a full bird's eye view of what project service automation is in D365. All right. So let's start off with the sales cycle. So sales cycle can start with opportunity, quote, and order. But in case you want to include lead as well, you can do that. But to do that, if you are a developer, if you're a consultant, you would know that you might need to have some fields in place in order to then proceed towards opportunity. So to keep things simple, I'm starting off with the opportunity, which is the first step of the sales cycle. So PSA is actually an add-on to the core Dynamics 365 if you have a full customer engagement license, and if you have project service automation installed. And if you go to the left-hand menu where all your apps are available, you would see the project service app ready right there. So you can click on it. Also, it's an important point to note that Project Service Automation version 3, PSA v3, is only available on the unified interface and not on the classic UI. Because anyway, classic UI is going out in October, and all we'll be left with is the new unified interface. So here's a typical form. Let me start with the opportunity. The reason you don't see a form name here, but because it's just one form, but the project service information is the name of the form that is used by PSA, and it has all the fields which are relating to project service automation. So I'll talk about a few details on this, which fields actually drive project service. So there is this thing called as contracting unit. So what contracting unit is actually a segmentation of your services in terms of geography. Like let's say CloudFronts US is an entity and CloudFronts India is an entity. So the contracting unit I would like to keep is CloudFronts US, so that it has the cost price list and sales price list in terms, which is set according to that region. So it's much like business units, but in terms of how pricing and projects are driven through it, right? And the next important thing is the product price list. This price list includes the sales prices, which I have set. Since now we are a professional services company, so the services or the price list include roles, which I would say are developer or project manager, and so on. So this is a sales price list which will be used further on. There's one more field that I'm not showing here is called as type. If the type field is an option set field actually, and if I set it to type of work-based, then it means that this particular opportunity is of PSA. If it is item-based, then it is of type field service and so on. So that happens behind the scenes, so we don't need to worry much about it. So to proceed further, let's say that we want to move this opportunity ahead. So if I, open the business process flow, I have some of my custom fields here. So let's say my opportunity is set for Bean House Company. I just want to go ahead and create a code for them, right?
Marina Noticia.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah. So what happens is your information flows from opportunity to code with all the information like contracting unit and product price list. There's one important field in code is the requested delivery date. So you have to remember this because this will be helpful to get us to a end date for the code lines we will be working on further. So this date is important, requested delivery date. So now I'll go forward and enter some code lines. So when I go to the code lines tab, I can create a new code line. So let's say we want to do some Dynamics 365 implementations for Bean House Coffee. So my code line would be Dynamics 365 implementation. Another code line could be a post-go live support. Any other code line could be Power BI implementation. So while creating a new code line, I can fill out this information. I can just put a name to the code line or typically the service that I'm trying to offer. There's this billing method. So there are two types of billing method. First is time and material, and the second is fixed price. So in order to keep this presentation concise and short, I've selected fixed price because it is shorter to explain. But I'll tell you the difference between the two. Time and material meaning as and when you quote something to the customer and based on the efforts you need, which could vary from task to task, you can bill them. So your developers or people on this project who are working, they need to do time entries, which you as a project manager should approve, and all those things, those accounts to the time and material. So You can say it's like a pay as you go thing, and fixed price meaning that this project has a fixed price of so and so $1,000, and there's no any extra cost to it. If at all there is, you need to create some other code line, and then you have to set that type of that. So fixed price meaning a flat fee that you have for your project. So let's go with that example. At this point, you can choose that if you want to create a project. Even if you don't, that is also okay. But for the sake of this demo, I'm just creating a shell of the project here. So there are two things here: invoice frequency and billing start date. So remember, I had showed you one field called as requested delivery date. That was the end date to till when the project should be delivered, and this is the billing start date. So these two dates are important so that your billing milestones, which we will look at in just a moment, those billing milestones are dependent on these two dates, and plus the invoice frequency, meaning how frequently the invoice should be generated. Those are, these three factors come in and they set your milestones for that project. I know most of you must be wondering, how do we set up all this? There is definitely a setup process to getting started with PSA, but I skipped that just so that I can go on and explain the main fundamentals of it. But yeah, you can for now you can just keep this in mind that there are a few things to set, like the frequencies or what types of unit you're using, and some product setups as well. That is the most least required project PSA setup you would need, and that is a one-time setup. All right, so let's say I'm creating my first code line, and I'll just create a shell of the project. So when I click on new, I'll give that project a name, let's say Beanhouse implementation. It's not a template. Template is something else, which if you want to use repetitively, you can set this as no. Then this is a calendar template. Calendar template meaning what are the times your users or your resources are working. What holidays are you following? So these are the typical calendar templates. Let's say if you're following US times, those times and time zones will be set in the calendar template. And then contracting unit and start date and some basic monitor information is entered, and I'll just click on save and close. Okay. So my project is created. I haven't done anything much with it, but to to add more code line details, you have two ways. One is that you can create something manually right off the bat, that you want to create a new code line detail and you want to add information like Dynamics 365 consulting, designing, documentation, discovery calls. Those things you can enter manually. If not, if let's assume for a minute that your project was already set, which I didn't at this point, but let's assume if it was set and the project had some project tasks in it. So you can just do that by creating on import from project estimates. So if you click here, whatever you have created in the project, those will populate according to different roles and different tasks that you created. So imagine I have a project and it had some tasks, which we will also get to at a later stage. And if it had some tasks like requirement gathering, designing and development, go live and support, those will be populated here. So this is just a little feature I wanted to show you. Not necessary you should use this, but once you start using PSA more and more, you could decide that if you want to use this or not. Otherwise, you can simply go with having the code line details. So moving on, just keep in mind all these amounts that are populated. Those actually make up to the total cost of that code line. Then there is the next tab called as the invoice schedule. This invoice schedule is important in terms to use for invoicing. So since remember we have started this as a fixed bid project, so meaning between the billing start date, which we saw in the general tab, and on the quote we saw requested delivery date, that is the end date. And we also had set of invoice frequency, which was weekly. So according to my settings, if I create a generic if I generate a periodic milestone, what would happen is between those two dates, and depending on how my frequency is, it will create 4 equal milestones for me for when the invoice should go out, and all of them have the same value, which amount to some 50,000 or so dollars, I guess. So this way my invoice schedule is ready. Now, let's say my quote lines details are ready. Quote lines is ready, which I just have one quote line in it. And that amounts to, yeah, 15,700. So what we just saw in the last slide was a total of 15,700. So let's say my quote at this point is set, and I just want to mark it as 1. So if I click on close as 1, what will happen is an order will be created. So just to recap, this was a quote because it has same icons. It's confusing. I will close my quote as 1. It will create an order for me, right? So this is the sales order entity behind the scenes. And all my information is tagged right here. Later on, we will come to create an invoicing. But for now, let's proceed to just confirm the order that, yeah, this is what we're going ahead with. And once I just confirm, the status is changed to confirm, meaning we are good to go with project management as the next part for this particular coast, for this particular code, right? So the next part is project management and resource scheduling. So there are 2 parts to this. One is project management, meaning mostly you will be working with projects entity. So I can either go from the sitemap here. If not, I can simply be on that order. And if I expand related entities, I can go to the project section, right? If at all, remember I had just created the shell of the project. Even if you hadn't done that, you could still create a new project from here. But since I just had created that project, now I'll go ahead and open up this Beanhouse implementation project. So, and to recall, remember we also had created some quote line details, which I auto-populated using import from code project task. So these were those tasks that got imported in that quote line details tab we saw, right? So my project is set like this, that I have 3 main tasks, which is requirement gathering, designing and development, go live and support, right? There is this column called as predecessor. I'll get to it in a moment. So let's say all my tasks have a start date and an end date, and some hours assigned to it, depending on how I see it would take, right? Then I have added some team members as well, as so these are actually bookable resource booking, bookable resources. Bookable resources meaning these are records that get treated as resources on the project. They could be of different type. Let's say it could be of type user or a contact who are not using Dynamics. So they could even be that. And you can have multiple entities which can be created as bookable resources. So I'm using users here. So myself, my manager Kuldeep is here, Sachin. So we are 3 people who are assigned to different tasks. So these are just, put on those tasks as placeholders for now. Those get added in the team later on. We'll see that. So coming back to predecessor. So predecessor 1 meaning I cannot start designing and development until my requirement gathering task is finished, which is on 6th November. So 7th and 8th November is probably a weekend. So the next task starts only on 9th November. Similarly, my go live and support cannot start unless I finish designing and development, which is 17th, right? So it starts the next day. But let's say there's something called as go live and support, which not necessarily needs to end right away. So what you can do is there is this thing called as mode. There are 2 modes, auto and manual. So if I switch this to manual, I get the flexibility to extend my end date and not necessarily be bound to the hours which I put in. So if you were wondering how these hours, match up to the dates, remember the calendar template that we set in, and each of those have work hours. So in my calendar template, if I set a work hour as 8 hours a day as 1 day, so those hours are calculated and those days then move forward pertaining to that. So that is how I've made the last task a little flexible and not, made it end to strictly 60 hours from 18th September, and hence I was able to push it a little further, right? So my basic, very high level schedules are set for now. What I'll do is I'll show you the team's grid. So remember, in the schedule grid, what I had added were the 3 resources. Those get added here, and they can have different roles. So role is an aspect where a cost is tied to a cost is tied to that particular role. So it could be $75 for a developer, it could be $100 for a project manager, and so on. All those costs drive up to accounting, to invoicing actually. So we'll ignore that for now, but yeah, so let's go ahead, and assuming there are certain costs for each of those roles, and based on how many hours they are assigned, if we go to the resource assignments tab, we would see the breakup of all of these according to either by resource or by the roles. As such, we can change the time scale from day to week or month, and your numbers would pop up here. So this is just an estimation. These are assignments. Actual bookings are not yet done. So it might be a little confusing if you think that, oh, are these already booked on the project? But they are not at this point. Okay. They will be further booked on. So to do that, we can go to the resource reconciliation view. This is one of the other methods to book a resource. So if I say, if I expanded Kuldeep's, and if I say that on 9th September, he's assigned 8 hours. He's not booked yet, but I can just confirm his booking. So I can right click it, and I can say extend bookings. And what will happen is I just have to confirm that there are no other bookings for Kuldeep for this day. So if I just click OK, the 8 hours that were allocated for him or that were assigned to him would be confirmed. And that would turn as an actual hard booking for him on this project. The only drawback is that there's no flexibility of, if we want to book only a certain number of hours, but whatever is assigned, exactly those number of hours will be assigned to them. Okay. So there is this nice feature if you want to quickly finalize all the booking and you look very confident in that, you can do that. Else you can do that on the schedule board as well, which is our next part. But there are a couple of tabs to go before we can move to the schedule board. So the next one being estimates. So these are the monetary estimates. I can have it by sales or cost. And then again, I have some groupings by either by resources or the tasks or even the roles they have been assigned on. So this gives us an estimation of how my weeks look in terms of finances based on the projects, and so which task, which resource will fetch how much in what week. So this is a great overview to actually tell us how your future weeks look like, right? So this is the great view. Then there is tracking. So I will come back to this at a later part where I will talk about time entries as well. But for now, what I can say is, remember we had talked about 2 types of projects. One is the fixed bid project and other is the time and material project. And time and material types of projects need their resources on a project to, submit some time entries on that project that they worked on. And the project manager of the project needs to approve them. And once they approve, those get turned into actuals, right? So let's say there was a time entry of 4 hours, which a resource submitted. The project manager actually approved those hours, and those hours were calculated against here to that task. So, and that would then give you how much was the progress made out of out of 38 hours, 4 hours were done, 34 were remaining, so 10.53% were completed. So you can track all these here. So that was the tracking. Now we come to the schedule board. So schedule board is a grid table. It's a little useful tool that gives you a visual cue of how your resources are booked on different projects. So it's like a window to visually see how you manage your own bookings, right? So let's say you're a resource scheduler in the organization. Even though if you're a project manager, you can do that as well. So there are different resources which gets populated here, and based on that, you can expand those. You can change the dates, and you can select a window where you want to see the blocks. So these blocks necessarily mean how are the bookings looking for your resources. And from this bottom pane, you can see the list of all the projects that you can select and book these resources on, right? So if I go ahead and so yeah, so this is just a typical representation of how a schedule board typically looks for a week. So in this example, I have shown that Priyesh is booked on 3 projects, that is the 3 days for 24 hours. So the reason you see 100% is because the work hours or my capacity to work for a day is set to 8 hours, and that's why I'm utilizing 8 and 8 hours per day on the project ASA CRM implementation. This is that project, and I have simply booked a pre-share on the project. So if you can see in the legends, you would know that, oh, this is a hard type of booking, right? If there was a booking which you have made mistakenly, and if you want to cancel it out, you can simply just right click a booking and set the status to cancelled. That booking will turn like this. And you would see that it's not utilizing anything because it's a cancelled booking. There are some schedule board settings here as well, which will let you see, which will let you toggle between if you want to see the legends or not, how you want the views to be, should you see canceled bookings all the time or not. Actually, I can take a moment to show you the schedule board myself. So this is the schedule board. These are the projects. And let's say I select Kuldeep here. And if I select any other project, let's say Apple's project, if I select that project, and if I, you know, okay, let's book myself first. Yeah. So I'll deselect because it has selected everything. So what I'll do is I'll just drag to these 3 days, and the project selected is Apple's project. I want to hard book, and I want to equally distribute these hours to 12 hours per day from 6th to 8th, and simply click on book. So what will happen is those many hours will be booked for Priyesh. So because my capacity is 50%, I can see that 12 hours are split between these 3 dates. I can even right click and click on edit to change any hours if I want to. So if I just do 8 here and click on update, those will get updated in the backend. Yeah, so the utilization goes up to 100%. Then there was something that I talked about was cancellation of bookings. So let's say if I right click, I don't want this booking, I can set the status to cancelled, right? So that booking, that booking is gone. It's in cancel state. It doesn't disappear. But let's say I talked about some schedule board settings as well. So if you go to some scheduler settings, you have some settings right away that, oh no, I don't want to hide legends. I want to show these legends now. I want to hide the canceled bookings. So my canceled bookings are gone. And then if you open the tab settings, these are different tabs where you can add more tabs, some for yourself, some for organization. And there are a whole lot of settings you can do, whole lot of different views that actually control how bookings should look, how actual bookings should look, and all of that, which entirely needs a different session of its own. So we won't go into that, but typically this is how a schedule board pans out. You can even select the dates to and from. You can change if you want to see all the days, if you want to see all the weeks as well. You can see all the months as well. There's one more thing I'd like to point out. The reason you're seeing these grayed out blocks is between the work hours for that resource are not set to be working, and that's why you see all these blocks. So typically on weekends, if your resources are not working, those will be grayed out, so that the resource managers don't book them accidentally on those days, right? um, okay, going back to our presentation. Yeah, so typically how the schedule board looks, then yeah, these are the 5 different booking methods that you can book a resource on. I'll briefly explain what each of those do. First being the full capacity, meaning if I select this entire week for Kuldeep, if I book him on the full capacity, so let's say Kuldeep's capacity is set to 8 hours. So 5 days in a week, 40. So he will be booked for 40 hours. If there are some extra bookings already there for some other project, those will remain and he will be booked for some overbooked hours on those days. So that's what full capacity does. Um, then there is a remaining capacity. So remaining capacity means anything that is remaining out of that day, that will be booked. So percentage meaning if like in this case 50% is booked for all the 5 days, and if I just use the remaining capacity, so the percentage capacity, and I book 50%, it will all fill up and make it 100%. If the resource is already booked for 60%, and if I do 50% on top of that, it won't be restricted to just 40%. It will overbook 10% for that resource that day. So so these are the scenarios where it will be overbooked. Then there is this case called as evenly distribute hours, which I showed you in the example, that if I expand, if I select a few days, whatever I wanted, and I did evenly distribute, and then I enter some duration here, like say 20, like we did in the example I showed. So per day, the hours will be divided equally, and that resource will be booked, right? And finally, front load hours. If I select the entire week, and if I just select 30 hours, so it will book 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours, maybe 6 hours, and then the remaining won't load because it will just fill up all the first hours. So that is one method. So these are the different 5 methods where you can book a particular resource on projects. Um, if you expand this, there are different filters which will show you what all these resources should be populated in this window. So as of now in this trial, I have just set up 6. But if I have multiple resources and I don't want to walk them through, so I can select based on the territory, or if I have different org units, I can select based on that, and only those resources will show up here and which I can use to book on. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, so there was this example of front load in the slide. So I just selected him. I've just selected Priyesh for to book for 6 hours, and there, it filled up 75% of the capacity. And if I just hover over this booking, I would see what the project is, what the start and end time of the bookings are. Since it was just 1 day, so it's just 1 day and 6 hours of duration, right? So that's how typical resources are booked. Next, coming to time and expense entries. So time and expense entries meaning this is used for time and material types of projects. Like there's no fixed price for the project, but you are actually billing the customers based on how your resources are working, how many hours they're working. So they need to come here. Let's say Kuldeep Gupta is a resource. He's logged in and he wants to submit a time entry. So he will click here on new, and he wants to do a 4-hour time entry on Beanhouse implementation for the requirement gathering task. And his role is as developer, and he will enter some notes as the description and some comments that should go out to the end customer, because if you're using some reporting and if you're sending them some invoices, you can have your own custom ways to include all these external comments as well. So let's say if they save and close, So he has entered for, let's say, 29th of August, 4 hours, but it is still in draft, right? So unless he finalizes all the time entries, and once he decides, he can choose to submit those. As soon as he submits, so I'll just go back one slide. As soon as he submits, it's being submitted from by him. And if I am the project manager, if I'm logged in, I have this view in time entries in approvals called as time entries for approval. And I would see that, okay, there are a few time entries which I have to take a decision on. So I'll just select those and I'll click on approve. You can even click on reject if there is some issue. Once you reject, you can even add some comments of why you're rejecting. But if you're approving, they'll simply be, approved, and the status on the time entries will also be approved. And there was this tracking slide which I showed you, which I will go back uh, to the presentation and show you. So the time entry which Kuldeep made for the 4 hours on this project, on this requirement gathering, will get turned into actual, which will show up here. So this is how, looking at tracking, you would know that if you're overshooting the budget or something like that, or how far you have come in terms of completing the project, right? So if I again go back, yeah. So here we were. There I have another view which is called as my past approval, so that you would know all the time entries you had approved so far, right? So that was a small part of time entries. Similarly, expense entry is also another part of it, which means you can, like how you submit time entries, you can even submit expense entries. And those expense entries need to be approved as well. If you have some receipts while traveling, you can also choose to attach a receipt with that, so that so that those can be approved as well, right? So, and that is something that if you want to submit to the client, where they need to see if you traveled something for work, which also needs the approval. So yeah, so that's that. Coming to the next part, which is invoicing. So remember, the quote line that we had designed was for $15,700. What happens is now you want to send out the invoices, right? So you are here on the order, but you haven't created any invoice yet. So what you do is so this is your project baselines. These project baselines come from the quote, and your next task is to go to to open up the contract line on the order. And when you do that, you go to the invoice schedule tab. Remember, we had generated schedule of your milestones. So those come up here, and whatever you want to generate for that particular project, you can open this up. You can open one of those, and you can set that particular contract line milestone to ready for invoicing, meaning whenever the next invoice is generated, you have to be careful that the milestone date and should lie before when you're actually sending out that invoice. So once you mark it as ready for invoicing, you're all set to go with this particular line on that invoice. Uh, and with that set in the order, you can click on create invoice. So once you click on create invoice, a project invoice will be generated, and it will only include that particular line which you had selected originally, right? So even though your project was for $15,700, what will happen is only the invoice milestones which were ready to be billed, only those got added up here, right? So this was a short example of invoicing. Invoicing is pretty complex, and there are many angles to it. Even time and material, all the approved time entries will add up. If there are any extra costs, those will be added up as well. But let's say I get asked this common question about what will happen if I have a fixed bid project, and I want to do some extra time and material kind of work in that as well. So usually the answer is go ahead and create a separate project, which is an extra, which is of type time and material, so as to not clutter everything, trying to keep the records less. Uh, So that was the invoicing part, and this is the reporting part. So these are some of the reports that we've used internally. So based, if you have a reporting team with you, you can develop reports which you need. So this is a typical example of how we do the reports. Budget versus actuals, and these reports touch a lot of entities behind the scenes that are the project task, how many hours were there, how many are the approved time entries, how many non-billable, and all of that sort. So these are SSRS reports. Now you can do, then there's another report you can do is resource allocation. You can see that which resources are booked in the future. Maybe you can have these reports developed by your team and sent out via email, or if the reporting team or the managers need to see that, that can happen as well. There's another example called as billing report. So if you select certain filters, uh, you could know what are the time entries selected for that particular project, and those time entries will come up with the rate and everything. And you can send these billing report to the actual clients if you're billing them pretty regularly based on your billing schedule. So these are all custom reports. These aren't out of the box, but these are just a few examples I wanted to present of what you could do in terms of reporting angles and how you actually need them. Then you can even have a full project overview kind of report where you want to see how many projects were completed by tasks, and the status of each of the tasks. So this is also one high level project report that could go out weekly or monthly. It all depends on what your needs, your requirements are. Okay, so that was the PSA. That was a very high level overview. Um, Anyone who's not familiar with PSA, I really hope that this session tried to put some light on how PSA is. There are a lot of details in PSA, and it's pretty vast internally, but that was the best that I could sum up in terms of PSA. Talking about what the future of project service is, if you have followed news lately, you would have heard that, oh, the project service automation is going away and it would be replaced by project operations. So project operations is a new offering by Microsoft, which will lie under of Microsoft 365 apps. So it will appear like a separate app in your Microsoft 365, like how you have Power Automate and D365. So three things happen with that project operations is PSA, the licensing of PSA will stop after October, and new project service will be out by then. General availability of project operations is also, I guess, after June or July, which I'm not sure on the dates, but we are headed to that part. So anyone who is using PSA already are okay. There is no issue. But if you're, um, and let's say if you're Microsoft, if you're partners with Microsoft, I guess, or if you're under enterprise agreement, you have up to 2021, like till next year, or up to 2024. There are a couple of years, at least 1.5 year, where PSA is supported. Just that new licenses won't be sold after October. But if you're continuing to use PSA already, it is fine totally. Microsoft will also start giving us the migration path, but I don't have any clear news of it yet. And even the licensing of project operations that aren't clear to me as yet. But if you're following me on LinkedIn or Twitter, as and when I get any news, I'll try to post it as well and keep everyone aware of what's going on with PSA. So I also get asked that, do professional services company only get to use PSA, or is it suitable only for them? Well, answer is not. PSA can be used anywhere, wherever you have resources and whenever you have any kind of projects going on. Let's say for construction companies, for chartered accountants, CPA firms, for law firms whom you have associates and who need to be billing their clients. You can, this is a product with vast applications. So it's only up to the organization on how they want to utilize PSA. So that was PSA on from my end. I hope this high-level session helped you understand. And if there are any questions, Raz, could you bring them up if we have some time left? Or for the rest of the
Thank you very
questions,
much.
what we'll do
Yes,
is,
that's
yeah,
great. Yeah. So we've got time for questions. We've got ample time. So please, I'm sure many of you have got questions. People who are new to project service automation. So what Priyesh has done there is given you an end user's perspective of how to use the application versus the managers. And I'm sure there's many other questions related to project service automation. Now, I know that that Priyesh really understands project service automation to a very deep level. So please don't feel shy in asking questions related to project service automation. You'll need to feel free to post your questions inside the chat screen or unmute yourself and ask away.
yes. So again, for if anyone missed the beginning of the session, this is my LinkedIn profile. And you can always reach out to me for any kind of PSA question, and I should be happy to answer them. And there is always something that that is remaining, but always feel free to reach out to me. The PSA is so vast that even I haven't covered a lot of things in it, and it keeps on evolving. So I'd really hope interacting with all of you. I'm here even after my session. Please post any questions and I'll take it up. If I'm not able to even answer immediately, I'll ask for some time and I'll make sure I'll answer your question. It was great interacting with all of you, and I'm open in the chat window always, right? I'll pass it on to Raz now.
Hi there, Priyesh. So thanks
Yeah.
again for that. So are there any questions by anyone? There is a question actually. So Artur, Artur's actually going to be speaking actually very shortly on chatbots after Neil. And Artur's asking really regarding a comparison between PSA Project Online and project side of on basically the FinOps side of projects. Basically, there are for the attendees, there are different product management apps and products released by Microsoft, and it can get quite confusing as to which to use when and to know their features and limitations. Do you have any guidance for those people listening today as to how they should approach that situation?
Okay, so can you repeat? Can you rephrase that question?
So the question again is by Otto, and it's the fact that it's very confusing because there are many product management applications by Microsoft, and from the different products, whether it's Office 365 project, whether it's FinOps, and is there any way you could help just easily clarify the differences between to help position PSA a bit more clearly for the audience?
Yeah, so how, if you want to place PSA among this portfolio of Microsoft products, is if you already have Dynamics 365 in your organization since a long time, and if your core is something like CDS, or if your core is something like Dynamics 365 Online from the past, you can utilize CDS to go into that direction. So when I say that PSA is sunsetting soon and project operations is coming up, so the idea behind project operations is to take capabilities of the sales side of PSA, which would remain as is. The project operations will be a separate app. It will utilize the current project online scheduler engine, which is very powerful. It will utilize that so that if users are familiar to using project online, it will utilize the scheduling and project management capabilities out of that. And for invoicing and accounting, it will utilize capabilities from FinOps. I only have some high-level details on this as yet, but once we get public previews and we start getting general availability, I can have more clarity on that as well.
Thank you. Robin Godfrey has asked a question. Can the schedule board have different views? Can we use different views with the schedule board when assigning work?
Yeah, you can. So you can either select weeks, you can select days, and then you can double click and book. If there are certain settings you want to follow, you can create your own tabs in the schedule board, and those tabs, only you can have it. You can have your own views if you're a sysadmin enough to create your own views, and those use those views in their tabs. It is adjustable to a certain level. There is a little flexibility to do that, yeah.
Sorry, we lost you there, Priyesh. So for Robin's questions, Robin, does that answer your question related to the views? So you can have your own tabs and views within
Yes.
within that. So if you're a manager and you're assigning work, you can use different views.
Yeah, you can have your filters on that particular tab. Which you want to select certain resources. You can, if you want to have different tabs to show for projects, you can change different views as to if you want to show certain columns from the project that you're booking, you can change those little things here and there. Right. I'm also looking to do some schedule board sessions as well, particular to that soon.
Right, because David was interested in knowing how to create the custom views.
Okay. All right. So, okay. So this is the default views. So this particular, if you want to talk about this view, this comes from project requirements view. So, we need time to do that. You can reach out to me separately and I'll walk you through a separate session. But these are all the Dynamics 365 views itself, which get used. So you can change this view, of course. If you want to create a tab of your own, you can create a new tab and have some basic default settings. And you can choose if you want to just share this with yourself or everyone or for a certain set of people. Then there are different settings. So these are all the out of the box ones, but if you want, the resource details view, all those can be added. So I'll just go ahead and create a new tab just right away. So this is now the schedule board. It's only for myself. And then I can, if I have different system views in Dynamics 365, I can always double click on this. It will open up my tab schedules and I can select different view that I created from there and then have it populate over here. So, and these settings will remain only with this particular schedule board. So there's a whole lot to cover in terms of the schedule board. I'm looking to have a separate session. Maybe I'll show you something after the session as well. Okay.
Thanks, Priyesh. Yes, as you know, the schedule board is probably the most important feature when it comes to PSA and field services, and I guess that's probably where people have the most questions and the most issues related to, as well as customizing and knowing how to customize the schedule board and the limitations. I think that is something we should definitely have something a bit deeper on, 100%.
Yes. Yeah, we can have a full session on just the schedule board for project service and field service users.
Yep. So Robin seems satisfied with your question. Thanks for the question, Robin.
Yeah. Great.
And before you, obviously we'll be joined by Neil in 5 minutes. So you've still got 5 minutes there, Priyesh. So do you have any for beginners with PSA? Do you have any tips for beginners to get started with PSA?
Sure, absolutely. So since this session was targeted for beginners, but I just had to place a bird's eye view on PSA. But if you're already familiar even functionally with Dynamics 365, with creating some views for yourself, or how to give certain security roles, you can always create a trial, create a few users, give them, make them actors, like make one the project manager, make others a normal resource. Neil Parkhurst has good blogs, really great content. Antti Pajunen, Kuldeep Gupta, all these people have put out a lot of good posts on how to get started with PSA. And their blogs are very detailed right from the setup itself, like setting up your organization units, setting up your time mileage systems, or how your schedules should be. There's a lot of content available which talk about just the basics, and it's very quickly available. It's not even you have to search a lot. It's right out there. You can just sign up for a new trial, install a project service app from the solutions in the new admin center. It takes about 3 to 4 hours to do that. Once that is up, you can right away get started with your settings. Once your basic settings are done, you will be ready to create your own projects, run your own sales cycle on your own as well. On CloudFront's website, Kuldeep has also written an ebook which also talks about the setup, and which is actually pretty easy as well. Neil Parker's website is very detailed and will kind of clear out every doubt anyone might have. I myself referred his content, so and that's great stuff as well. So it's easy to get started with PSA, provided you are quite familiar with Dynamics 365 core itself, right?
Great. So we got there you go. So Neil Parker's URL, we're posting it now. Yeah, thanks Neil for that. And also your blog post as well. You've shared that already. I'll add that to the chat as well, because you've got you're covering a lot of topics, aren't you, Priyesh? Not just on PSA, but on general Dynamics 365 development, which is good, and basically extending JavaScripts and plugging your own plugin solutions to improve the features and functionality. So one final thing just before, because there's a lot of questions around the new PSA and the new project operations. So my question is this: for those people looking at or considering PSA, would you say for them to not go with PSA and wait for project service operations, or would you say there's no reason to proceed with implementing PSA for their projects?
My personal opinion would be to wait if it's not really critical. But even if you get started and you already have Dynamics in place and you still have a couple of years more of support, depending on the type of partnership you have with Microsoft, like what level of customer you are, you're okay. But then after that time, what you would have to do is, again, do all the migration stuff. This is all based out of CDS right away. So even I don't believe that even migrating from old PSA would be that difficult. But I would still suggest, if it's not super urgent, you can wait, because October is just around. Given the current situation in globally, things are still going slow, and October will really come by fast. If you can wait, that is good. If not, there's no harm in that either. But always, I would still recommend to wait for a couple of months. And if you already have D365 and you're looking to use PSA, you can do that as well. But then there is a hassle about then changing the licensing and migrating. So it's absolutely your call. Yeah, but I would recommend to wait.
Thank you once again, Priyesh. And thanks, and everybody. Thanks for Antti for sharing Priyesh's blog link. Please feel free to follow Priyesh Wagh on Twitter, LinkedIn, and follow his blog. Thanks again, everybody. And we will now introduce Neil Parker.
Thank you, guys.